Good evening, all. Of all the Hammer horror films, one of my favorites, since it's not really a horror film, it's hard to describe. It's Captain Kronos, Vampire Hunter from 1974. It stars Horst Jansen, Caroline Munro, uh, Lois Dane, John Carson, Shane Briant, John Cater, Ian Hendry, and the very lovely Wanda Ventham, who I know best as Colonel Virginia Lake from Jerry Anderson's UFO, but plays a completely different role in this one. It's a very, very strange movie. Captain Kronos is a captain formerly in apparently the Swiss, I think Swiss or German army, and the action seems to take place in Europe. I'm not sure what century it's supposed to be. I think it's about 17th or 18th century, but it's not anything before that or after that. It's certainly not 19th or 20th. Europe somewhere, and a small village, and women are being killed by. They start as young women, and something approaches them and bites them in the mouth, and they turn old, incredibly old, and they age to death, basically. Um, Captain Kronos is summoned to this village by his friend Dr. Marcus, who is played by John Carson, and he tells them about what's going on with these young women. You never see the person who's attacking them, you just see a black-robed figure. You don't know if it's male or female, and there's an interesting little bit of misdirection about that, which I'll get into in a bit. So Kronos comes, he meets, with Dr. Marcus, and Dr. Marcus explains he's got his friend Grost with him, who is a hunchback. He's also a professor, and he's very knowledgeable about everything, particularly vampires. And when he describes the symptoms of what happens to these women young women who suddenly become terribly aged, he says it's a vampire. They say, well, he didn't drain their blood, and he says, Grost says, and this is interesting, there are as many different types of vampires as there are beasts in the wild, and there are as many different methods of attack, as you would expect from beasts in the wild. That's kind of interesting. He and Kronos start looking for the vampire, and they do some interesting things, like they explain the origin of the term toad in a hole by what Grost does is he goes around and digs holes in the areas where they think the vampires have passed by, and a vampire has passed by, and then he buries these boxes with a dead toad in each box. And the idea is that if a vampire passes by, it will somehow make the toad come alive again by imparting life energy which it has stolen into the toad, and then the toad will come back alive. So that explains the term toad in a hole. I don't know if that's true or not, but they did that for this movie. And I thought that was very cool. They're doing this, they're trying to find out, what's happening. More women are killed. They meet with two interesting people. They think that whoever's doing this has a very fancy coach, because they find wagon wheels near the victims. And a coach passes by, and it's driven by the coachman of Sarah Durward and her brother Paul Durward, who are the descendants of a very famous swordsman, the children of a very famous swordsman who died of the plague many years ago. And that is Hagen Durward, played by William Hobbs. And they meet them, and they're very odd. They're very young, and they seem like they're sort of cavalier. They meet them in a cemetery, which is a little weird, but they're honoring Hagen, who was the greatest swordsman of his time. And Captain Kronos wants to visit his grave, and doesn't realize who these people are until he starts talking to them. There's some suspicion that maybe they're somehow connected. They also have a very aged mother who apparently after Hagen died, became very distraught, and now she has become aged before her time, and she just lies in bed, and she summons them when she wants them with a bell, and has this really, awfully aged face. And the daughter is so horrified by her look that she won't even go into the room with her anymore. They bring her food, but she never seems to eat. That should be a clue, but it really wasn't up until later in the movie. Um, they meet, Grost and Captain Kronos meet this woman, Carla, who is in stocks. And they ask her why she's in the stocks. And she says, I danced on a Sunday. That was thought of as being a sin back in like the 16th century. You couldn't dance on a Sunday. Sunday was the holy day. So they cut her loose, and she wants to tag along with them. And she says, I'll follow you if you'll have me. And Horst Jansen says in a rather lascivious way, I'll have you, all right. That's a little bit of a clue as to things that are going to come later on. And another killing happens while they're meeting with Dr. Marcus, and they go to investigate. They're doing all these things. They're stringing up bells, and they're looking for these toads that Grost has buried throughout the county, and they find one that's alive, and a carriage has apparently just passed by recently. They're not sure, what's going on. And another woman, this guy he was watching, his girlfriend, he says, you should be careful. She says, you can watch me the whole way. He watches her go off into the woods. There's like one moment when she disappears over a hill. And that's long enough, because when he comes back, she's dead too, in the same way. She's been horribly aged. But he didn't see anybody there. He didn't see any attacker. So this kind of adds to the mystery. Carla's tagging along with them, realizes now that they're Grost tells her that they're vampire hunters, and she's trying to help as much as she can. She and Captain Kronos sleep together in a scene which is very cleverly constructed. Carolyn Munro refused to do any nude scenes. Was famous for that. She would not do nude scenes, albeit she had a very lascivious figure, which is a curvaceous figure, I should say, which is evident in the movie. And they do, by lighting and shading, that you never actually see her nude. There are just suggestions, sort of, and she and Kronos do it in this barn, and as they're sort of in post-coital bliss, Grost rushes in and says there's been another murder, and so they have to go and find what happened. Somehow, Dr. Marcus is accompanying them. He wants to help them, and he is attacked, and we don't really see what happens, but he slowly realizes what happened when Dr. Marcus is a middle-aged man. He has gray hair and a beard, and when he goes to shave himself in the morning, he realizes his hair has turned brown and his skin is fair. He says, "Oh no," and goes to Kronos and says, "Kronos, look at my face. What's happened to me?" And he says, "My God, I'm one of them." And he unlike most vampires, he realizes that he's a vampire, and also that he had killed one of these victims in the wood. He had turned into a vampire bat and drunk the blood of a buxom young redhead. This movie keeps up the Hammer tradition of quote-unquote blood and boobs, which there's quite a lot of both in this movie, but it's much deeper and much more interesting. He begs Kronos to kill him because he doesn't want to be a vampire, and Kronos had actually explained that he had been attacked by vampires. When he went off to war, he left his mother and his sister behind, and when he came back, they had both become vampires, and they tried to kill him, and you see that he has bite marks on his neck, but they're healed, and he somehow managed to heal himself of the vampire bite. So it gives the idea that maybe a vampire's bite is not fatal, and it doesn't always turn someone else into a vampire, that it can somehow be cured. Though they don't really tell you how. Dr. Marcus begs to be killed, but he doesn't want to be a vampire. They try to put a stake through his heart, it doesn't work, he doesn't bleed, and Grost says a vampire only bleeds at the moment of his death. They try to hang him, and that doesn't work either, and finally he does in fact die, and what he died from, they figure out he was wearing a steel crucifix, and it penetrated his heart. So for this particular type of vampire, steel is the weapon that will kill them. They sneak back into the graveyard where we had seen the meeting between Kronos and Grost and the Durwards, and they take a steel crucifix and they're going to turn it into a sword. Well, all these swordsmen from the village come up and they're challenged. They think Kronos is the one who's bringing all this on them. So they're challenging him, and he is such a good swordsman. He knocks the swords out of each one of their hands and leaves them there with their hands bleeding. He doesn't kill anybody, but he leaves them there with their hands basically ruined, so they're never going to fight anybody again. And gathers up all their swords and takes them. An interesting point here. Captain Kronos carries both a basket-hilted saber and a Japanese katana, which I thought was interesting. And where did he get in the 16th century a Japanese, samurai sword in a black lacquered case, which I thought scabbard, I should say, which I thought was an interesting thing to put in here. Just again that he was such a great swordsman that maybe he had somehow come across a samurai in his travels and had gained access to a katana. There's an interesting scene where he uses it, where he and Grost are in a bar, and again they're trying to find information from the villagers about these killings, and they're asking the bartender. The bartender pretends he doesn't know anything, and these kind of ruffians are in there, three ruffians led by Hendry, who was a very famous British actor, and I remember him particularly from Train to the Far Side of the Sun, but he also known as Doppelganger. But he is the leader of this band of ruffians. He's a mercenary, basically. He's been paid to start a fight with Kronos, and he insults Grost. And Kronos says, we're calling him a crookback. And he says, that's not very nice. I don't like that. He says, well, I didn't ask you if you liked it or not. He says, well, you wouldn't like it if I called, he said to the three of them, if I called you ugly, called you fatty, and you big mouth, he says to Hendry. And, of course, they draw on him, which is a big mistake. All he does is, you see two quick movements of the katana, like, and then all three of them, very slowly, in kind of like a Sam Peckinpah-ish style, fall dead to the floor. Their throats completely slit. And I thought that was, a great way to show, what a master of the sword Kronos is, which is going to be important in the later scenes. Anyway, they take this crucifix out of the graveyard, and Grost forges it into a broadsword in rather a remarkable period of time. That would take a very, very, very long time to do, but they make it look like it took, only a couple of hours, which is ridiculous. But again, you have to suspend your disbelief. And it's sort of an interesting shaped sword in that it is triangular, but it has one flat side. The back side of the sword is flat, and the other side is pointed up like a pyramid shape, sort of. It does not have a fuller, it has a rise instead of the fuller. But he also has a piece which he makes that fits over it, which is of highly polished metal, one side of which is basically a mirror. We know that vampires don't like mirrors. They don't cast reflections. They don't like to look at themselves in mirrors. They can't stand the way they look, apparently. And that's going to become important in what happens. There's still Grost and Kronos and Carla are trying to track down the vampires, and they realize that they think that it is the young Durwoods, Sarah and Paul, who are doing these killings. And Kronos proposes to use Carla as bait. She knocks on their door, pretends that she's a peasant who's been beaten and needs a place to stay for the night, and that's at the castle of the Durwoods. And Paul Durwood lets her in and says, well, you can sleep here on the couch, and we'll check on you in the morning. And he brings her some water and some food, but you'll have to leave after that. She says, oh, thank you, sir, and kisses his hand and is acting all innocent. And we see that and of course Grost and Kronos are waiting outside to see what's going to happen. You see someone approaching in a kind of a black cloak, and you think at first that it is Sarah Durwood because it's apparently a woman, and then the cloak falls away and it's not Sarah Durwood, it's her mother, who is now revealed to be the young and beautiful blonde Wanda Ventham, who most of you will only know as Benedict Cumberbatch's mother. But an interesting thing, she met her father was a technician on UFO, so Benedict Cumberbatch has a UFO connection. But Wanda Ventham has become young by stealing the youth from these victims, the ones that we saw earlier. and she's also revived her husband Hagen, who died of the plague, using the same method. And now she's coming after Carla, but Kronos jumps in at the last moment. She has hypnotized her children who've come down the stairs to heard a commotion to find out what's going on. She uses her hypnotic powers on them. They become sort of frozen like zombies. And Kronos turns the mirrored side of the sword against her, and she witnesses her own gaze in the mirror. And she sort of hypnotizes herself. Now, I don't know if they just wanted to limit Wanda Ventham's dialogue because maybe they couldn't pay that much for her role, and wanted her to have a limited speaking role in the movie. But she just stands there frozen for most of the last couple of scenes after she confesses to her children that she had revived their father. And you see Hagen is revived, but one of his side of his face is completely pocked from the plague. He and Captain Kronos enter an epic sword battle like something out of a Douglas Fairbanks Jr. movie. They're jumping on tables and knocking things over, and the sword gets knocked out of Kronos' hand, and he has to go grab another one. He got stabbed in the shoulder, and he's tripping and knocking things over. It's really kind of a ridiculous, over-the-top, kind of a scene. And eventually he gets the better of Hagen, despite the fact that he's this great swordsman, and he stabs him through the chest with the steel sword and kills him. And then the spell is broken on the children, and Wanda Ventham and Hagen both become terribly aged, and they turn into basically moldering skeletons, or kind of a gross special effect. Really well done, rather disgusting looking corpses, and they just are destroyed. And then everybody who was under their spell, including Carla, is released. And Kronos and Grost are going to leave now and go off into the countryside, and they leave Carla behind. And he says to Carla, I'll think of you on cold winter nights. And she says goodbye, and they leave. This was supposed to be the first of a series of movies. It was both written and directed by Brian Clemens. Brian Clemens worked with Hammer a lot. He had been a producer and an associate producer. This was, I believe, the first movie that he actually both wrote and directed himself. And it was really good. I think he did a really good job. He took a very unique twist on the whole vampire legend. And also, this is the first one where somebody other than Van Helsing was a vampire hunter who actively went out and sought and destroyed vampires. So that could have been quite an interesting series. Unfortunately, the movie didn't do that well at the box office, and this was just about the time when Hammer started falling apart. And while it was not their last movie, it was one of the last big productions before they went bankrupt, I believe in 1976 or 7. Somewhere around the late 70s, the Hammer went bankrupt, and they wouldn't produce anything more until they were revived in, I believe, 2000. There's now a new Hammer Studios, but of course that has no connection to the old one. Anyway, Captain Kronos Vampire Hunter, I highly recommend it. It's completely unusual, very interesting. Horst Jansen, who played Captain Kronos, was best known for doing the German version of Sesame Street. He did over 100 episodes of that, which I think was kind of interesting. Did a lot of movies in both German and Spanish and French. Did very few in English. He only did a few in English, and mostly he played, Nazis or German officers. And he played a German officer in a World War I movie also. But I think he was in a couple of westerns too. But really good movie. Caroline Munro was absolutely radiantly gorgeous in this movie, and John Cater was really quite good as Professor Grost, as Professor Heironymous Grost is his full name. Very interesting, amusing, comic relief character. I highly recommended Captain Kronos, Vampire Hunter, 1974.